Welcome to Podnutz episode number 29. This is an interview recorded with Scott Moulton of myharddrivedied.com. It's all about hard drives, everything you would want to know about hard drives, and actually, we probably couldn't fit in everything we actually wanted to talk about hard drives, so we're going to have Scott back hopefully at a later time and cover even more. But here's an hour's worth of pure data about hard drives, so enjoy. I'm here with Scott Moulton from myharddrivedied.com. How you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Very good. Thanks for joining us today. One of my listeners actually has been bugging me for a little while to contact you. He's like, you got to contact him. He'd be great for the show. And so I went to your website and checked it out, and you're definitely into some really cool stuff. And I think a lot of stuff that we could definitely cover on the show to help people understand hard drives, forensics, data recovery, and that kind of thing.
Well, great. I appreciate it. I'm glad that people refer me.
Sure. You got to love that, you know?
Yes, I do.
Word of mouth. Scott, why don't you just talk a little bit about yourself and what you do to start off?
Okay. I run myharddrivedied.com, which is a data recovery company. We've been in business doing data recovery for 8 years. At the same time, I've also been running a sister company together, which is a computer forensics company. Primarily, the job that came first was computer forensics, which is long, drawn-out processes that you'll sit there and do all day long. While I'm doing that, I'm also performing, and I have a staff that performs data recovery. So we're actually rebuilding and doing things, and we're all doing it forensically sound ways so that we're actually preserving the content, using a lot of the same techniques for each that we would actually use for forensics to do actual data recovery. So the data recovery business has basically grown out of that, as well as the fact that I've gone around the country, given talks and speeches and doing conferences all over the country about data recovery, about how to do your own data recovery, so that if you don't want to spend, $2,000 or even $1,000, $800 on a drive, and you're not going to physically pay somebody, you can actually learn how to do the process yourself. And it has kind of developed into this. I've been doing training. I had a lot of demand to do classes, so this past year I started teaching classes, and a lot of data recovery companies and everybody from, some people from FBI, a few people from even places like Kennedy Space Center and stuff have contacted me about classes. I've had a large group of people that have taken classes from, different data recovery companies all the way through to computer forensics people who want to know more about the drives that they're recovering content from.
Wow. How did what started all this? Was it the data recovery service that started it, or how did it all begin?
Initially, it started with forensics. I've been doing forensics for a long time, a little longer than just the data recovery. But what ends up happening is when you're doing forensics, in the beginning in 1999, 2000, when we started doing forensics, it was difficult to teach a lawyer that we had the content that they needed in their case. So in a lot of cases, a lawyer would see a computer and it would sit over in the corner and it would mean nothing to them until like the day of court. And then they'd be, well, let's go hurry up and look at this. And so the hard part was marketing to lawyers, because you can't really market directly to a lawyer. They have to know each other. They ask each other, who'd you use in this case? And then you get referrals from that. So I started building the business that way. And probably in 2000, I probably had 12 or 13 law firms that repeatedly used my services. But you still have a lot of gaps. When you're doing a forensics case, it's typically going to be 40 or 80 hours at a stretch. And then you'll have 1 or 2 weeks you do nothing, and then 40 or 80 hours at a stretch again. So during that time period, I'm like, well, what do I do with all this really expensive equipment and really expensive software? So we decided, well, let's put up a website. Let's start doing data recovery. It's the same exact process. There's a little bit more in the data recovery side when you're doing physical repair, but some of that was already happening already. So it kind of grew in that direction. And I spent 3 or 4 years doing data recovery before someone finally said, well, why don't you do a talk on this, because other people don't know this stuff. And I did a presentation at DEF CON 14 or DEF CON, something in that range. And that kind of spawned this whole thing with videos and teaching people and starting to get questions and answers on a constant basis. And so the data recovery business has grown tremendously, as well as the forensics business.
Right. How did you get so knowledgeable in the subject? What kind of training did you do to get to this point?
Well, most of the stuff I've done has been by the seat of my pants. What you'll find out from a data recovery perspective is everything's a trade secret. No one wants to share information. There's no place to go and actually learn what you're going to do in data recovery. And, now that's changed a little bit, and some of it because of me, and some of it is all of my classes. So there's a couple of companies that teach material that I have taught or written for them, and there's some new ones coming up where I've actually written or produced the material for them to teach it. But typically, it's a pretty rare thing to find someone who actually understands data recovery and is training or teaching it in any fashion. So a lot of it has been laying the groundwork myself, physically rebuilding drives, going through 20 practice drives before you figure out how you're actually going to pull off the head assembly from the actuator arm and repair it and put it back. So you actually go through that process quite a bit before you kind of narrow down what you're supposed to do. And times have changed quite a bit because back in 2000, you didn't have the constant release of new drives every day like you do now. So luckily, I've already learned a lot of that back in the earlier days when it was still, fundamentals. And now it's grown on top of that. So now you have a lot more advances that are much more difficult to deal with that I have to learn on a constant daily basis. And if I had to learn all that today, it would be a tremendous amount of information to actually start all over and begin now.
Wow. So you just started taking apart drives for your job, or you just had a strong interest in it?
I had a very strong interest around 2000 in actually figuring out how the head alignment worked, what actually happens with the platters, and how you can actually repair and how to compare two drives that are completely different, one working and one not working, and figure out what part wasn't working and try to replace that and actually get it running, and trying to do that comparison of firmware and model numbers and things like that so that you can rebuild that drive.
So was that like a hobby at that point, or was this like a crash course because you decided to start your forensics business?
It was not a hobby. It was a business at the time.
Okay.
I was already doing the forensic stuff. Okay. This was an appendage to the forensic stuff. So I had several cases where I might have drives that were damaged in a case,
right,
and there was a reason to repair them for the case. So you basically start, like I said, you start with a dozen practice drives before you try it on your real drive.
Right.
So you go through this process till you figure out how it works. So you buy dozens of the same type of drive you want to learn. You do the repairs, then you actually move on to the real one. And I've done several. I've done drives that have bullet holes in them. I've had drives that have, the third head ripped off and stuck to the magnet and actually repaired it and rebuilt it for like an FBI case. Those kind of things have come up quite often. And it's very convenient to know how to do that from the data recovery side to actually help the forensic side. But it was much more than a hobby. It was the whole point was actually to do this for business. And I hibernated for like a month and a half, 2 months at a time to learn the process and build on it.